Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1290 of the Locked on Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. And today's podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered the season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. And today's podcast is myself and Josh Lloyd, who is on the same podcast network that I am, the Locked on Podcast Network. Josh is, for my money, the best fantasy basketball analyst in the business. I do mean that sincerely. He is very smart. And even beyond the fantasy world, Josh is very smart. NBA draft stuff, just overall league analysis, etc. And it was a good time to get him on the podcast. As stuff is sort of ramping up at this point, I know it's a little bit early for all of this at this stage, but there is plenty to get to on the Hawks roster in terms of changes, how they might impact fantasy, and also impact stuff on the floor. Griffin talk, Trae Young, Dejounte Murray, etc., etc. All of that coming up on the podcast with Josh, and also my annual or daily, I should say pretty much, plea to subscribe to the podcast. We are now into the doldrums of August. I do understand that, but I'm going to be delivering content as much as humanly possible, and I try to get that out there for you guys. So please subscribe to the show across platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, of course, YouTube on the video side. Also follow the show on Twitter at Locked on Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. And after you hear the intro to myself and Josh Lloyd talking all things Hawks.
You are Locked on Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I am joined now by one of the best in the business. Josh Lloyd is here from Locked on Fantasy Basketball and all kinds of other things. Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Brad, it's good to be back on.
It's my pleasure. Listen, I was thinking about things to do as we all do this time of year. It's early August, and I'm thinking, before Josh gets buried in requests talking about fantasy and all kinds of stuff later on, I figure we get out in front of this thing. I know you probably are not in full midseason form just yet on fantasy. It never ends for you, though, as I'm sure.
No, there is some slow periods, and so this is actually a little bit of a dead period. In fact, what I'm doing on my show at the moment, I'm doing a fake expansion draft. So just to bridge as we head into August, and then things start to ramp up. But yeah, there is always something going on. Just at the moment, there's just a lot less of something at the moment in the NBA.
Definitely, we're all in that period now. August is like the 1 month where just nothing generally happens. Of course, unless KD gets traded, then we'll have to break into whatever we break into. But I want to ask you about what the Hawks have done, and then we can sort of get to fantasy stuff too, because I know I always stress this. I'm sure you do as well. You're not only a fantasy analyst, Josh. You actually watch basketball. You don't just do the numbers. Like you actually know about basketball.
That is true. Amazingly, my job does entail watching basketball every single day of the season and every single team that I've got to watch over the period of that time. So, yeah, I do watch a ton of basketball and try and keep abreast of everything going on in the NBA as well as the fantasy side of things.
Yeah, you're juggling a lot. I guess I'll start with the headline event of the Hawks in the last couple of months, and that is the Dejounte Murray acquisition. We've covered that on all sides at this point in time, but I found talking to people online, offline, especially people that cover the whole league, there's a lot of varying opinions on what they paid for him, how it's going to work with Trae. What's sort of your opinion on how that might all work? Because I think we all agree he's a good player, but beyond that, there's some differences in how people view this thing.
Yeah, we do agree that he's a good player, but the thing that I have with Dejounte Murray is I feel that, and you would have had this, talking to people and interacting online, is that there is a significant level, I think, of overrating happening with him. And he had a great season last season. There's no doubt about that. But he did it for 1 year on a team that had torn everything down and said, you are just going to do everything. Like DeMar DeRozan had gone. They got nowhere with him being that number one guy. He had a career best in assists. His usage went through the roof. His efficiency somehow went up while his usage went up. His steal rate was at a career high as well. And while we can all look at that and go, well, he's just going to continue to do those things, he's going to be great. Like, that, not necessarily. Like, when he played with other guys who had the ball in their hand or needed the ball in their hand, he was fine. He was nowhere near the all-star level like that he was. And even last year, he was really fringe all-star and got in as an injury replacement. But 2 years ago, he was nowhere near that level. So while it's not impossible that he continues to play at a similar level to last season, I wouldn't be surprised if in a different ecosystem where there are other guys like Trae, who are significantly better than anyone he played with last season, but even like Collins, Capela, Bogdanovic, these guys might all be better than the second or third or fourth best players on the Spurs last season. So how he fits in there, I've got no idea. It's not a fait accompli that he comes in and goes, right, I'm the second all-star here. And how that fits with Trae, I still have a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think that is totally reasonable. It's one of those things where it's all different ecosystem-wise, and I think the leap was real, like you said. Like, he managed to really improve a lot of his peripheral stuff while taking on more usage. That's really hard to do, but it's still going to be a different role. And he has played with guards, but nobody like Trae. It's not like he's only been a point guard his whole time in San Antonio, but never played with a guy like Trae. And the way that I kind of been putting it, I wonder if you agree, is like, I don't really think you can project him as an all-star. Like that goes in the press release, and I get that. But like you said, injury replacement, and I don't think he's a top 25 player in the league. That's what an all-star basically should be, around top 25, 30. I don't think he's necessarily there. Maybe he is. Maybe he proves that he is, and the leap was all that real. But it was more about the way that he kind of checks all the boxes for the Hawks. And I've said this ad nauseum. I'm sure my listeners are laughing now, but like they kept saying over and over again, we want a guy who can handle the ball and also defend at the point of attack. And he's like the A+ version of that guy. Now there are still questions, the jump shot and all that stuff, but it was more about like what he actually brings in terms of the theoretical fit than anything else, I think, other than between that and actually being able to call him an all-star, which certainly helps the PR wise.
Yeah, that's the old that's the Kings Domantas Sabonis trade move. It's two-time all-star Domantas Sabonis, that when you're trading away one of your future young all-stars, perhaps in Tyrese Halliburton. But you're right, in terms of defensively point of attack guy, he's really good. Like he's excellent at that. Like he's a very, very, very good defender. And the Hawks have needed another ball handler, and he fits that bill as well. Now, both him and Trae were top 4 in assists per game last season, and there's no way that's going to stick. Like it just isn't. Like you can't have two blokes getting 20 assists combined per game, which is what they basically averaged last season. It just isn't going to happen. And my worry is that some people say, oh yeah, that's fine. Trae can just play like Steph and he can play off ball. And I go, why would you want to do that? Dejounte Murray is a worse playmaker, a worse passer, a worse shooter than what Trae is. So let's take the ball out of Trae's hands so that Dejounte can run things. That's where defensively, I think it's awesome. Offensively, I'm not really sure, because I feel like Dejounte needs the ball in his hands to be successful. But you've got a guy in Trae who, when the ball's in his hands, everything runs. And I know it didn't work well in the playoffs against Miami. I know that. And having that secondary options there. But I think in general, if you're the coach and you're sitting there, you go, right, who's going to run things? Is it Dejounte or Trae? If you lean towards Dejounte, I reckon you're doing it wrong most of the time.
No, I totally agree. And I think that you do want to allow Dejounte to flourish, and that means probably playing Trae a little bit more off the ball than he ever has before. They've all kind of acknowledged that. But I'm totally on board with what you're saying. Like I've kind of stressed this too. Like you don't want to make Trae an off-ball player. You want to sprinkle that in. You want to have him be able to do that. He's the guy who can shoot of the two at a high level. We kind of already know that. But the worst thing you could possibly do is not run pick and roll with Trae Young. That's what he's arguably maybe the best in the league at, one of the 2 or 3 best in the league at. He's incredible at that. And you can't take the ball out of his hands. And I haven't thought about the assist thing, actually, but you're right. I mean, this will probably be the first time in a while I've not picked Trae to be like maybe a dark horse assist leader, because I think that he's probably going to have a little bit less assists, you would imagine. But especially Murray. Like Murray's not going to average not assists a game again. There's no way that's happening.
There's no chance. Like if he's under 6, I'd be more surprised to him be over 9 than him under 6, because I just go back and look at all his past seasons. Like he wasn't ever that guy until he became literally the only option for them, and then he was producing those numbers. So it is going to be really intriguing as to how they do that. And basically what you're doing, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, but you want someone to come in and fill the Kevin Huerter role on this team. Like someone's going to have to drop usage and drop ball handling and drop touches. And do you want Trae Young to be Kevin Huerter, or do you want Dejounte Murray to be Kevin Huerter? And then if you put Dejounte, that's the problem. It's going to be really tricky here for Nate McMillan, is if you make Dejounte Murray in the Kevin Huerter role, he can't shoot. Like he's not that level of shooter. And if you put Trae Young in the Kevin Huerter role, then he's just not going to touch the ball enough. So the offensive fit is strange, and it's going to take a lot of massaging of guys around there, because it's not like you're the Hawks are bereft with other offensive options like Bogdan Bogdanovic, who was awesome again towards the end of last season, depending on the health of his knee. But like, is he just not going to we'll stagger Dejounte and he comes off the bench. Okay, so does Bogdanovic never get to shoot anymore? Like, how does it all work? It is a really, really tricky question.
Josh, you're a pro. That's a great tease for what we'll be talking about in a second. But first, before we get to that, a word from our sponsors on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. At BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check on all of your sports betting needs. Find all of these favorite sports and events that you have at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games, with a ton of future-facing action on the site, with football season fast approaching, of course, NBA future odds still firmly in play, and much more. Find reviews and news for all of the leagues that you are interested in. That includes MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, soccer, golf, tennis, auto racing, horse racing, rugby, entertainment bets, and much more. BetOnline also is a top resource for all the wagering beyond that. That includes live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, as well as casino games, poker, and all the other ways that you might have to get in on the action this year and always, honestly. Head to BetOnline right now today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the trends and the action across the sports world. BetOnline, where the game starts. Josh, you're talking about Kevin Huerter. Obviously, I'm going to ask you about that deal, but also just kind of before we move off of Murray and Trae and all that stuff as well, it's kind of all intertwined, but there's already a debate happening, and it shouldn't be a debate. I think that you'll probably side with me here, but it feels like the most clear stagger situation in the history of the world. Like they almost have to they have to stagger Murray and Trae, if only because Murray's going to want some on-ball usage, obviously, and they don't have anybody else behind them. Like, I like Aaron Holiday. He's more of an off-ball player, though, despite being 6 feet tall, not necessarily a run-the-offense kind of guy. Does that sound right to you? It feels like there probably needs to be 12, 15 minutes a game where it's the Murray show on offense.
It's got to be those 12 minutes. So your Trae plays his 35-36 and Murray plays 12-13 as the primary point guard. Aaron Holiday plays 0 minutes would be ideal. I would expect. Like, you've got other guys who can fill in that role. I think ahead of him, I think he's probably more realistically an 11th or 12th man on this squad. But yeah, look, it has to be that stagger. Now you would know probably more accurately than me. Like, is Nate McMillan in the Doc Rivers school of like hockey subs, or is he going to be able to stagger that? Has that been a problem in the past for the Hawks?
Yeah, I mean, he's not quite to Doc's level, but Nate has been, let's say, more eager than I would be to run full bench units in the past. Now, I think maybe one of the things that Travis Schlenk is doing here is not letting him do that by having this roster, but also Nate coached Aaron Holiday in Indiana. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. Yeah, it's one of those. I have a little bit of concern. Not a ton. Like, I'm trying to ask, but it's August. They're not trying to answer these questions just yet. But I'm like, guys, they're going to do this, right? They're not going to stagger these guys. They have to. It's so obvious. They have to do it.
It's the most obvious situation in the entire NBA. And if it doesn't happen, there's going to be I won't be happy about it. I'm sure you won't be happy about it.
I'll be yelling about it on the podcast. Like, almost surely.
I don't think you can make. I don't know how you can make that mistake, but I've seen Doc Rivers do it before, so it is possible.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, and that's why, it is very obvious. We agree on that. People ask me, and I said, look, I think they're going to stagger these guys, and there's no reason why they wouldn't. But I just, had that little bit of an inkling deep in my head. And I agree with you on Aaron. I kind of like Aaron Holiday, but he's a guy that if you are fully healthy, he probably shouldn't play in the rotation on this team. Yeah. I think he's a good emergency guy. It's a good signing. It's a 1-year minimum, all that stuff. But all that to say, you brought up Kevin Huerter. I want to get to that too, because not only did they trade him, and that's a loss. I mean, that was a deal that had some money implications. It had some future pick implications, but they got worse than that trade. Even as one of the bigger Justin Holiday fans in the world, I think that I am. I like Justin Holiday, but he's not as good as Kevin Huerter. And they lose a lot on offense. Now, defensively, they get better in that deal. Holiday is good. I think Huerter is underrated defensively, but Holiday's better. But like you mentioned it, there's that secondary usage, and part of it's going to go to Murray, but what happens beyond that? Because they don't really have, Bogey is, I guess, the other logical option he's more of a shot creator than a passer at this point. What did you make of the way that all shook out besides just kind of giving it all to Murray?
Well, it's an interesting one with Huerter because I think the Kings overpaid by giving a first-round pick for him, and considering what they did with what their roster looks like there's a legitimate argument that Huerter and Monk and Mitchell and Fox, how do they all fit minutes in? I don't get why the Kings are giving up a first round pick to get Kevin Huerter. And I also look at the Hawks who signed him to that extension. I feel like almost as soon as they did, they were like, oh, is there a way we can get out of this? And getting a first round pick, they probably didn't have any other offers there. But you're right, getting an asset that you can't use this season when you've actually gone all in and given away future first-round picks, it makes you worse. But is that recouping some of the Dejounte Murray cost by getting one of those first-round picks back? And you don't have necessarily that ready replacement because Huerter's a really good shooter, a guy that, as you said, is not a terrible defender. He's not a great one. He's not terrible.
Yeah. And
he can pass and he can handle the ball. And with him and Bogdanovic running that second unit and starting at times, depending on health of other players, there were a lot of success with that. So it is an interesting one. It definitely makes them worse in the short term, but I feel like there's definitely an aspect of this where it's trying to recoup some of the Murray loss from the trades and the fact that maybe they thought he was a little bit overpaid, even though that's what they needed to do to retain him initially.
Yeah, I think that they were largely okay with the deal, but as you well know, luxury tax stuff happens, and whether we want it to or not, I think they were looking more of the long-term money, and they were like, well, we're gonna have to trade somebody, and that was the deal that was presented to them. I think obviously they wanted to trade Collins at some level. That Collins is very available, but they were also asking full price for Collins, which is why he's still on the roster. They haven't got their price met there, but I think the Kings deal, and I said this at the time too, like if that pick becomes a first-round pick, it's a good value for the Hawks. It's totally fine. There's a little bit of risk because it's the Kings that it actually never does. There's protections on it. It could become a second. If that's only a second round pick, the value is not fantastic. But if you actually get a first rounder and Justin Holiday for Kevin Huerter, that's a good trade, even if it makes you worse. And I think that it's just one of those weird things because I'm looking at a world where, let's say Bogdanovic has a delayed start because he's not guaranteed to be 100% healthy at the beginning of the season. They really need him. Like they really, really need him without Kevin Huerter because Holiday can shoot, but he's a pure catch and shoot, like no creation kind of guy. After that, it's like AJ Griffin. I mean, Deandre Hunter is the 3, but he'll be playing some 4. They don't have a lot of like dead-eye shooting on the perimeter at this point in time, other than Trae and Bogey if he's healthy.
Yeah, and losing Gallinari and Huerter, like your 2 shooters off the bench, is an issue. And I'd be, who knows? But I'd be pretty skeptical that a bloke like Bogdanovic coming off knee surgery after having multiple knee injuries over the last 2 years is going to be ready or at full health by the time. Like, when did he have the surgery? In May? Like, it wasn't that long ago. And I'm not confident that when you cut open someone's knee, it's whatever the timeline they give. I'm always going to go, all right, what's the later end of that? Then add a couple of weeks, maybe a month onto the end of it, because it's not likely that you're going to be back. I wouldn't expect right on that timeline. So if they say training camp, I'm going to say no, thank you. I probably expect start of November, and that does make it a little bit iffy. And you talk about, they wanted to trade John Collins. A part of the issue there, I think, with the Collins stuff is that maybe trading him, or they want to get off either him or Huerter, and maybe that's me, I don't know, imagining what they're trying to do in that front office.
No, I think you're right.
But they want to get off one of them, right? But if they move on from Huerter, they have Bogdanovic and they have Dejounte Murray coming in to replace. If Collins goes, there is who's replacing him? It have to be someone you get back in a trade, and it probably wouldn't be anywhere near as good. And the replacement level, it's a massive gap between Collins and Jalen Johnson versus Huerter leaving and then Bogdanovic and Murray picking up the slack there. And that's maybe part of it as well.
Oh, I totally agree. I think it's a very clear way to put it in that sort of plain terms, is like they could afford to win, because listen, they're in win now mode. Whether they should be or not, different question. There's clearly pressure from the top. They want to win now. And that's one of the reasons, if not the biggest reason, they've not traded John Collins, is that they have to get someone back to play the 4. And I've been trying to stress this over and over again. I know it's been out there in the league, but I like Jalen Johnson a lot. They couldn't roll with Jalen Johnson as their starting power forward this year and try to say with a straight face that they're trying to win. So like it just limits your options. If you're like, for instance, there was a little rumbling about Miami and Collins last week. They have nothing to offer them at the 4. Like that it can't work because the Hawks want to win. And if they didn't want to win, it'd be easy to trade John Collins. They could just flip him for whatever they can get and call it in. But I think that's part of the Huerter thing as well, is that they had Bogey. And again, we're hoping that Bogey is healthy and ready to go, but they have options there in the way that they just don't have with Collins. And I want to ask you about, like, kind of putting this all together on offense. It's possible. It's going to sound weird. I think Hawks fans have not loved this when I brought it up, but they add this all-star guard, in quotation marks, however you want to put that, with Dejounte Murray. It's possible they're worse on offense now as a roster, because basically when you lose Kevin Huerter and Gallinari, and look, those guys are not stars, they're role players, but they're 2 of your top 3 shooters, maybe top 4 shooters, along with Trae and Bogdanovic, and like you didn't really replace them. I mean, Holiday replaces Huerter in rotation. That hurts you on offense. Gallinari, for all of his defensive foibles, is a good offensive player still. Like, he has to be guarded, all that stuff. Like, is it possible they're just worse on offense, at least in the short term?
That's highly likely. Like, you're replacing Gallinari with Mo Harkless maybe, or Jalen Johnson in that spot. And as we talked about, like, if Dejounte Murray is playing off ball, like how aggressively do you have to guard him? Like, not at all, really. Like, he's not that deep. He doesn't take many threes, doesn't hit him at that high of a rate. He's not a reliable shooter. I would, if they're the same offensively or better, I'd be really, really shocked, I think.
Yeah, the counter that I could come up with is that maybe just having Dejounte on the court when Trae isn't will boost that second unit so much that it kind of offsets it. But you're also putting him out there without Gallinari. You're putting him out there with less shooting around him. Maybe you can try to stagger Collins and Trae a little bit more, get him on the court with Dejounte. There's ways to get around it, and maybe that boost really helps them. But like, the more I look at it, especially if there's any concern with Bogdanovic, the offense just doesn't look as good to me because at center you also have these two non-shooting centers, and I like them both. They're really good defenders, but you have two non-shooters at center that I kind of limit you a little bit on offense. Like Capela's a great screen setter, all that stuff, offensive rebounder, but I don't know. It's I'm intrigued by what they do on offense, and as we talked about a little bit earlier, Nate McMillan, not the most innovative guy in the world, so we'll see.
No, so especially offensively, there can be some issues with the way that he runs things.
That is for sure. All right, one more break to hear from our sponsor. We'll come back with more from myself and Josh. All right, Josh, I want to go off the beaten path a little bit here before I sort of ask you some fantasy questions. And I know you did a lot of draft work. AJ Griffin did not play Summer League, so he's kind of out of sight, out of mind at this point. The Hawks fans are obviously dialed in on what he's going to look like. I've said a lot about him, but what was your evaluation of AJ Griffin as a prospect since nobody's seen him since then? So it's all still new information.
Yeah, it was much higher than 16. I had him at times in the top 7, top 8 mix. I think I settled on him at around 9, maybe. And when he was falling, my immediate thought was, okay, well, the medical stuff maybe hasn't checked out because he did play 39 games, I think, Duke last season, but he had all those issues through high school with lower body stuff, and now you didn't play in summer league, but. A 6'6", 6'7" wing who I think's got some defensive ability. He's not quite there yet, but some elite shooting ability, maybe some creation stuff. Like that sort of player should be valued. Like to me, it was baffling that someone like a Johnny Davis went ahead of him. That in no world would that have been a move that I would have made. So to see him slide to 16 was pretty crazy to me. But again, I don't have access to the medicals. We knew that was a problem with him, and now we just haven't seen him on the court. So maybe that was actually the issue.
Yeah, I think that was part of the reason he fell for sure. And, the Hawks were saying all the right things on the record, off the record, everything about his medicals. And I think it was at least from what we know, it's kind of an unrelated, this is kind of a first-time injury. Like he had sort of a sore foot thing. There's no MRI weirdness with it or anything like that. But anytime you have a guy who has some injury questions and he comes out and does not play summer league and they make him day-to-day for 2 straight weeks, it's like, okay, we're going to do the whole thing again. You're kind of just opening the door for questions more than anything else. But I was with you. He fell way further than he should have in my mind. At the same time, as we try to transition into this year, I'm always this way. I want to know what you think, generally speaking, but my guard is always up on rookies, generally, especially for teams that are trying to win, like the Hawks are, that have a veteran head coach that does not like to play rookies a whole lot. We saw Jalen Johnson basically get a DNP for the season last year in similar circumstances. Are you thinking about Griffin at all as like more than like a dynasty guy in fantasy? Because in theory, there's a path to him playing if Bogey's a little bit banged up, but also he's an 18-year-old rookie who hasn't played a lot. So
yeah, I don't think he's going to play much this season at all. He might play a little bit at times, but I think he's going to be given the Jalen Johnson diet for most of the season. Again, you bring in Aaron Holiday, Justin Holiday, Mo Harkless, knowing Nate McMillan, he's going to prioritize those guys to be the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th guys on the roster versus Griffin, and Griffin will have. So look, if he might come out and just blow us away, and because he's exactly what they would need. Like that is, you talk about a Kevin Huerter replacement. Like that's a Kevin Huerter replacement if it works out and if McMillan trusts him. But I don't trust that at all. I don't expect McMillan to trust him or to put him out there or even give him those opportunities to show that he should be out there. So I don't expect much from him. But you're right, he's super young, and I think that when we head to next season, then he will be a key part of the rotation. That's the hope. That's the idea, and you push him in as one of those reserves. And then we see where he goes from there. But for this season, I don't think we're going to see very much of him at all.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think maybe in a world where Bogey just misses a month or something like that, they just kind of maybe have to try him for shooting because they're, like we said, they're going to have not that much shooting on the perimeter. But I think that given his defensive foibles, any rookie for the most part, other than the elite guys, they're going to struggle defensively. He was kind of bad in college. Throw that in there. 18 years old, Nate McMillan. I always wanted to ask because we're on the same page in terms of his like prospect evaluation. It's just that rookies are rookies and they may not play a lot. All right, I'm going to ask you a couple fantasy questions before we get out of here. I know cool. You're prepped and ready as always for these, but all right, this is in no order, but who currently do you think is going to present the best value fantasy wise on the Hawks this year? Because they have 7 or 8 guys that are definitely going to play, but we'll see what that looks like.
Value wise,
yeah, value wise,
it's pretty.
I know it's early.
But. Yeah, because look, I'm looking at where they're currently ranked on both ESPN and Yahoo, and everyone seems to be in about the right spot. Maybe actually that's not true because they've got Onyeka Okongwu ranked outside the top 200, so maybe it's him. And I'll throw. I think it's him because last season he was 137th in limited minutes. And I think he plays more, maybe a couple more minutes this season. Is there a world, Brad, where he is 24-24ing with Clint Capela and they're splitting the minutes?
I think it is at least conceivable. I would project that not to happen just because of all the factors in play. Like this coach, Capela's still really good. I mean, it's not Okongwu's fault that Capela's really good. Like I as someone who likes Okongwu, I kind of wish he was on a different team in some respects. Or not because he wouldn't be in Atlanta. Like I've always loved him. I had him in my top 5 in that draft and all that stuff. But like, is David Millen really going to take minutes away from Clint Capela? I don't know. We'll see. And I think a popular idea locally, as you might imagine, is like because he's 6'8", it's like can he play the 4? And it's like, well,
no, not really.
No, not with Capela. I mean,
Nope.
you could play him. We could play him with Frank Kaminsky if you wanted to. That's their third center. But like, why are you doing that? You have John Collins on your roster. You don't need to do that. So we'll see. I think he'll play more. Just to answer the question a little bit simpler, he'll play more than he did last year. I don't know how much more.
This is going to tie back, and this is professional broadcasting, Brad, tie back to something we talked about earlier on, and we talked about the decision between trading Herder or trading John Collins. Let me frame it a different way to you. If you had the opportunity, what you could trade Capela or Collins, that would save some money. Is a Collins Okongwu combination better than a Jalen Johnson Capela and then a Okongwu reserve combination? I kind of think it is. Now I don't know if they would do that, and we get hung up on size so much, but Bam Adebayo is a top 5 center in the NBA. He's like 6'9".
Yep.
Draymond Green plays tons of center. Is he 6'6"? I don't know. Maybe not. I don't think he's that big. So when you have the defensive instincts and the rim protection ability that Okongwu has, and the ability to finish at high efficiency, I don't actually care that he's 6'9". When you're basically the same size as Bam Adebayo, I don't actually care too much. So I think if we're looking at positive EV in terms of, hey, do I trade Collins or Capela? I can trade Capela, and maybe I drop a little bit by putting Okongwu as the starting center, because there are a million backup centers out there. Like Hassan Whiteside, he's not good, but if you put him out there for 15 minutes in a backup role, it's not bad, right? Versus who the hell is my 4? Like I'm going to dust off LaMarcus Aldridge to come in and play, or Blake Griffin or Paul Millsap. It's so hard to find a 4. So how does that work?
Yeah, no, I've said this before, but I think that Capela almost was too good. Like they didn't realize how good he was when they got him, I don't think, or maybe when they traded for him, he was hurt, and he was so good, especially 2 years ago, that he kind of just like made it impossible to move him. Not impossible, but in their minds, I think the plan was never to have Okongwu still be the backup center in year 3. That was never the plan. I can tell you that with very, very high confidence. Like you don't draft a guy at 6 and have him be a one position backup in his 3rd year when he's good. That's the thing. He's proven to be good already. Like that's not the plan. But I think Capela was just so good, and Trae likes him, and it's worked so well. But no, I think in theory you're making 100% sense. I think I talked about it a lot in the last year and a half. On paper, the move was always to trade Capela, because it was like, okay, you have this guy in Okongwu who you obviously love. For whatever reason, they either didn't get value for him. They gave him the extension, which maybe made it a little bit harder to trade him. There's different things of why they haven't done it. But no, I think you're not crazy at all. Even as a very big Capela fan as I am, I think that Okongwu, naturally speaking, just big picture wise, like it does make sense to go ahead and move on for Capela. They just haven't done it.
Yeah. Sorry to derail the segment on fantasy here, but I think Okongwu outside the top 200, like when he was a top 100, he was a rosterable player in standard leagues, top 150 guy. And there is, I don't think he's going backwards from where he was last season. I think that represents probably the most value, because everyone else, Trae's probably too high. Dejounte on ESPN is too high. Clint Capela is probably ranked too high. Bogdanovic with the uncertainty is probably too high. So there's not a huge amount of value with these guys.
Yeah, I think Okongwu makes a ton of sense, and especially this is not, you can't bank on this, but if they were to, let's say, have a rough start to the season and kind of maybe look to sell Capela midseason, or if you get a Capela injury, suddenly Okongwu zooms up the board, because again, he's already proven to be a good player in a way that a lot of guys in that role have not. So the opportunity might be there.
And Capela's had those Achilles problems for 2 years. And every season it feels like we head into preseason, start of the year, it's like, oh, Capela can't play. He's got Achilles heel on us. And you go, what's going on here? And then he's out there and he struggles at times, and he builds it up as he goes along. But when you're a big man and he's over 28 now, and you're having persistent Achilles and heel and ankle issues, I wouldn't say that's a great sign.
No, and at that age, anything can kind of happen, especially when you have those issues, like you said. A guy I haven't asked you about yet at all, so if you could take this wherever you want to, fantasy or otherwise. Where are you on the DeAndre Hunter thing at this point? Because I think it's kind of, in the conversation I'm having, I'm wondering if it's the same way with you. Like, he's a pretty obvious X factor on this roster, pro or con, depending on what you want to see. Last year was not great necessarily, but they're invested in him, and he is the guy at the 3 for better or worse. So, like, where are you at on DeAndre Hunter experience as he enters year 4?
I didn't love him as a prospect coming in. I didn't really love him as a rookie. He had that 10, 12 game run at the start of his second year where his usage and his efficiency went absolutely through the roof. But that's like a 3-week sample or whatever it is. He was really quite poor last season, and a lot of the issues I had with him is like inability to create, be a defensive playmaker. Like, he can guard 1-on-1, but doesn't generate stats that way. The shooting stuff has again had that little stretch of being good, and then it was bad for an unbelievably long period of time last season. Doesn't rebound, doesn't get assists. I don't like prototypically. Like, we love a wing that can defend, but I feel like he's taking so much off the table, and injuries haven't helped. Clearly, he's missed basically, one full season over the last 2 years with the injuries in year 2 and year 3. But it all ties into the way I viewed him coming out as a prospect. That lack of defensive playmaking, the lack of shooting efficiency, the lack of creation for himself and others, and low rebound rate. And it doesn't really change that much outside of the beginning of the 2020-2021 season for that couple of week period where he was unbelievable, and then hasn't really seen that happen again.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, this is more of a question for me, but for like fantasy wise, for a guy that, like, he's had some injury issues for sure. He's not always been the most durable, but you also know when he's gonna be healthy, he's gonna play a lot. He's their guy. Is he? I mean, I honestly don't even know where he's supposed to be fantasy wise, but like, he's a low rebound guy, low assist guy, not like a huge stock guy. Like, what's the value? And like, he makes threes. Doesn't take a lot of them though. So like, what's his kind of fantasy projection in your mind?
Okay, so I'll ask you this question before I answer it. Where do you think he ranked last season for fantasy on a per game basis? So not even including games played.
I can't imagine it was very high. I mean, his only real benefits fantasy wise last year were a decent amount of points, and he shot accurately from 3. But if you're in a league that reward 3-point volume, that wasn't very high. No assist. I mean, outside the top 150, even as a starter.
Yeah, 238. Like, so he's just miles off being a fantasy contributor. And while I think there'll be some improvement in what he does this season, I don't see him becoming a rebounder, an assist guy, a steals guy, a blocks guy, a high free throw volume guy, especially again, when you look at the offensive situation of the starting 5, he's the 4th best offensive guy. He's going to be the 4th in the pecking order. And when you pair that with low efficiency and low counting stats, I don't think I'd bother with him in most fantasy leagues. I just don't see that path for him overtaking Collins or Murray. I don't see. He's definitely not overtaking Trae. Like, offensively, he's not doing that. And this is 3-4 years now, like, including his years at Virginia, where he just doesn't get steals or blocks. He just doesn't do it. And banking on that happening, it might happen. Sure, maybe it comes out of nowhere, but that's just, I think, who he is as a player.
Yeah, and this is gonna be funny because I've been railing on his rebounding for a long time. He's a bad rebounder for his size. I think he will rebound better than he did last year. It's a very small bar to jump over.
It's not hard.
Yeah, I think he averaged he averaged almost 5 per game as a sophomore in a small sample size. Last year was like 3.3 per game. That's so comically bad for a guy his size. But I want to just ask about him in general because he's a big picture non-fantasy. Like, he's a very clear X factor for this team because he's going to play, and he's really all they've got there other than Justin Holiday, who's kind of their backup small forward. So I was just intrigued by that overall. I guess I should ask just this very plainly. Does Trae take a hit at all for you with Murray, or are you still banking on him being a fantasy superstar? Like, how good is he supposed to be for you now in fantasy?
I think he's going to take some sort of a hit. It's going to be a drop in usage, a drop in assist rate. It's not going to be as large as the drop in usage that Murray and assist rate that Murray cops, but he is going to cop something. And look, Trae was great last season. He was the 6th overall player. Yahoo somehow has him ranked 3rd heading into this season. But 2 years ago, Trae wasn't that guy. Like, when we had the addition of Bogdanovic and the addition of Gallinari, his numbers did suffer. He dropped off pretty significantly. We saw his usage drop by 4 percentage points versus the year before that. His efficiency didn't spike either. So, yeah, he could go from being a player who was 6th last season to, like, he was 21st the year before that. No reason he doesn't fall back off to that degree where we saw that usage drop and he averaged 25 points a game in 2020, 2021 versus the 28 that he averaged last season. Like, if he went back to 25 with the addition of Murray, I don't think that's a surprising outcome given the way that it happened with Bogdanovic and Gallinari joining the team 2 seasons ago. So it's not a fait accompli that he's just out there and just doing everything exactly the same. I do expect a drop. How big, I don't know. And I don't think it'll be quite as big as that drop in his 3rd season that he suffered, but I think we're going to have reduction in numbers from where he was last season.
I tend to agree too, just the counting stats. And I do think that his shooting percentages will not be as low as they were in year 3.
I agree.
I'm not sure they'll be as high as they were last year either. I'm not saying it's going to be a guarantee he shoots 38% from 3 again. And he's a great shooter, but that was the first time in his career that he had done that. That was a real jump for him accuracy wise from 3. I guess the counter would be he might get more open looks and more catch and shoot looks this year. So maybe he shoots higher. That's on the table, I guess.
Yeah, that argument gets thrown, and I know it makes sense from a look. Hey, he's not going to be seeing as many. Like someone told me, I expect Trae's scoring, or they'll argue with me. I expect his scoring to go up this season because you'll get more one-on-one looks with Dejounte. But in general, it just doesn't happen that way. Like we said, Kemba Walker, man, when he was on the Hornets, he had to do everything. Now he goes to Boston and all these numbers, all these other attention, and he shot like exactly the same percentage. It's just sometimes who the player is. It doesn't always translate as easily as that. Like when you go like Russell Westbrook, oh man, look, you're gonna have LeBron and Davis taking all this attention, so he's gonna get some easy shots and cuts to the basket. Yeah, nah, he's just gonna be worse. So it doesn't. Well, yeah, it might be counterintuitive to think that. It doesn't actually mean that you're going to see this gigantic rise because there's another good player next year. Sometimes that's just who you are in this season-to-season variance, and it doesn't always work that way. In fact, I wouldn't bank on it actually working that way.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense to me, and I think that I'm just gonna be fascinated by it, honestly. Just like what the role looks like, and I hope they don't go away from what makes him in terms of just running a bunch of stuff. And there's a little bit of fear of that on my end. Not that they're gonna go away with him entirely, but just that they don't let him do as much of that anymore.
I think it might happen, especially early in the season, and I think that might go poorly. And then I think we might go back to gigantic usage, gigantic assist rate. Like, just remember, like this is a guy that when he came out of college as well, like had I think one of the highest combined usage and assist rates ever, if not the highest ever. And it's been basically the same through the NBA. Like he runs things because he's good at it, not because he's selfish. Like, but that system works. And I reckon if you go away from that too much and it doesn't work, that it'll quickly revert.
Makes total sense. Same sort of question the other way. Like, what is Murray's projection for you? And obviously, last year we talked about it earlier, but he had the giant counting stats. He's not going to do that again. I think we could kind of all agree he's not going to average what it was, like 21, 9, and 8, or whatever it was last year. But like, what do you expect? I mean, we're all kind of guessing, but what do you expect from him in terms of his new situation in fantasy?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a significant drop off. So I wouldn't be touching him in the first 2 rounds. I think he's got more of a chance of finishing outside the top 30 than he does of finishing inside the top 25. 2 years ago he was like 55th or something along those lines, and falling back down to that level is not a surprise. Like we expect the assists to drop pretty significantly. I think the scoring is going to dip under 20 pretty easily. And then the other thing is that keeps him high is the rebounds, right? But like Jakob Poeltl, pretty good rebounder. Keldon Johnson. He's in the DeAndre Hunter school of rebounding. So Dejounte Murray was getting those, but now you got John Collins and Capela out there. Like these are 2 really good rebounders. So not to say that Murray's going to look, it might drop 1 or 2 rebounds. That's still a big drop. And then I go, well, his steals will keep him up. But last season was his best steal season ever at 2 steals. The year before he was at 1.5. And if you lose, 25% of your steal output, like that's a gigantic drop in fantasy value. And 1.5 is, and I talk about this on my podcast all the time, 1.5 steals a game is still really, really good. Like it's an unbelievably good number. It's not 2, but it's still really good. But that drop from 2, which is elite top, 4, 3 in the NBA, to 1.5, loses a ton of value. I would not want to touch him in the first 2 rounds. Probably not even the 3rd round, to be honest, because I think there's just more ways that it can go wrong in terms of dropping off than it can get better or even stay, 5% less than what it was last season.
Yeah, I mean, he averaged 21, 9.2 assists, 8.3 rebounds, and 2 steals a game. Like those are crazy numbers, and he earned. I mean, he racked them up. He produced them.
Yep.
But I think you got to take the under on every single one of those. Stats.
Absolutely. I think they're all going to drop.
Yeah, I would say, and listen, they could all drop. It could still be awesome. It's just that when all 4 of those things happen, I mean, I guess maybe the hope is that he shoots a little bit better from 3, but that's a hope. That's a fingers crossed kind of thing. Like we've not seen it from him. So no, I tend to agree. Last one, I'll let you get out of here, is John Collins. So We talked a ton about him. Trade rumor stuff has just been happening forever and ever and ever. And part of, I think, the national pushback is that his numbers did decline last year. His scoring numbers went down, and they're way down from where they were 3 years ago when he was kind of the only role man on the roster. What do you make of him now, still in Atlanta? I mean, I'm sure you went through scenarios of him being other places, but now he's back in Atlanta to start the season. At least it looks like. What kind of fantasy player is John Collins? Because obviously he's still productive and not quite the 21-10 guy that he used to be.
I don't really see how much changes from last season, to be honest. Like, are they going to pump 35 minutes a game into him? Probably not. We've seen them be pretty hesitant to do that. It feels like he's, I'll not say on the outer with Nate McMillan, but he's not as trusted as what he was earlier on in his career. The usage isn't there. We saw so much of his fantasy success, especially in that season where he was like a top 15 player because he played a ton of time at center, and now he'll get 0 minutes at center. That's when his blocks went up, his rebound rate went up, his field goal percentage went up. All those things drop when you're playing at the 4. And the fact that he won't play 34 minutes a night and be 20-10, I don't really see how much changes from what he did last year. He can still be really useful for this team. I guess the hope you have when you draft him is say that Utah says, like, can we have John Collins? And then he runs wild and puts up huge numbers over there. Look, and he becomes a 25-13 guy, which is actually completely possible if he was in the right spot. Problem is that this is definitely not the right spot for him to do that.
Yeah, I think the only positive counter I could present would be that I think he might play more than he did last year because Gallo is not there to kind of give them that very high floor. Like, really, Gallo as a backup 4 is like a really good thing that a lot of teams don't have. I think Collins could play a little bit more, but you're right about center minutes. I think with Okongwu getting even more, they might try him for a few minutes every once in a while at center, but it's going to be mostly 4 minutes. And listen, when I say play more, I'm thinking maybe like 32 minutes a game rather than 30. It's not going to be a huge jump just because of what they have behind them. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. The rebound did go back up last year a little bit more, but I can't see him averaging the 2010 kind of numbers with this roster. Boring. If Capela went down, I could see him jumping up again. Or even if Okongwu went down for any period of time, they might use him as a backup center again, and his numbers might go up. But I think as long as everybody's kind of healthy, 17-8, 18-8, it's kind of what you're going to get, I think.
Yeah, I got him at projected at the moment, 16-8. So 16, 17, and 8, I think is probably about the right mark for him.
That sounds about right. I think there's not really a sleeper on the Hawks roster, unless it's Okongwu, which we already talked about, because he's probably the only one.
Yeah, no, look, unless John Collins is traded and Jalen Johnson surprises us all and is ready to go. But because Jalen Johnson's got an unbelievably good fantasy game because he can pass, he can rebound, he can block, he can get steals, he can be efficient. He is a guy that we really look forward in a couple of years' time. And if he comes out just significantly ahead of where we think he is, and it's like, all right, well, Collins is gone and this guy's going to play, that'd be the only guy. But yeah, you're not really drafting him expecting that because it's just such an unlikely thing that's going to happen that you wouldn't want to put any sort of faith in that. But it's one to watch because I'd rather watch him than say watch Mo Harkless. I'm not interested in that. I don't think Justin Holiday is going to do anything different to what he's done over the course of his career. Like Frank Kaminsky, thanks but no thanks. Johnson's the only one that I care about to think that maybe it could happen, but it's just what is it, 0.1% of a chance of something really popping off there? I don't really think it's possible this season. Yeah,
and I guess dynasty-wise or whatever, you could say that if he gets the opportunity, because the Julie numbers were crazy good. I've always liked Jalen's game. I do wonder if maybe Justin Holiday ends up playing starters minutes if they were to not have Bogdanovic for a while. Maybe he'd be interesting, but even then, he's kind of the not interesting fantasy guy.
He does
just
nothing.
Shoots threes and that's it.
He gets some steals. He hits some threes. He'll have 9 points, but that's 3 threes, and then you get 1.7 steals. And much like Deandre Hunter, there's no assists, there's no rebounds, there's nothing else. There's very, very limited excitement levels in what he provides. So I think there is a chance for more minutes, and he's one of those guys that coaches fall in love with and play probably too much at times. But the overall output's not particularly great.
Makes sense to me. Quickly, before you get out of here, how good are the Hawks this year?
That's a really good question. I haven't gone through and sort of done my projections on standing. I would say that they're probably above the play-in where they were last season. Could they crack the top 4? I reckon that's probably a stretch. Boston, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Miami probably there. Is there a chance they could be better than Miami? Yeah, look, there's a lot of injury concerns in Miami, so maybe I would have them in that 4 to 5 range. I would guess at this early stage without trying to think, thinking off the top of my head without actually sitting down and working it out. But that's probably the right area. I don't really see them pushing into that top 3.
Yeah, that's right where I have them too. I know our friends at BetOnline had them as the 5th highest over/under right now, especially with the Brooklyn uncertainty. If KD's back in Brooklyn, maybe they're ahead of the Hawks too, but we'll see. There's a lot of stuff going on there. All right, Josh, appreciate all the time. Where can people find you? Because I should do a good job plugging you because you were on this network with me, and I said it before I brought you. I'm gonna say it with you on the podcast. I think you are the best of the business that does this on the fantasy side. So plug your stuff everywhere.
Well, I host the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, so you can find that YouTube and wherever you find podcasts. And I'm on Twitter at redrock_bball. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok now as well, so you can go check it out over there. And yeah, that's it. Thanks, Brad, for the kind words.
You cannot find me on TikTok. For everybody wondering, I'm not on TikTok, but you can. You should follow Josh there if you like TikTok. All right, thank you, sir, for being here. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this show. Check out Locked On Fantasy Basketball and everything that Josh does, and we'll see you all next time.